Hello, I'm Jim Clark, President of the North Caroliniana Society. Annually, for almost 45 years, this organization has recognized an outstanding citizen of our state. In 2021, we are honoring distinguished public servant and civil rights leader Howard N. Lee of Chapel Hill. Like his predecessors, Senator Lee has prepared an address for our membership. The title of his speech is Breaking Barriers and Building Bridges, Reflections of a Son of the South. Congratulations, sir. The North Caroliniana Society proudly presents you this sterling silver goblet. It symbolizes your invaluable and ongoing contributions to social justice and positive change in North Carolina.
Thank you so very much, sir.
You're very welcome.
Dr. Clark and Ms. Kane, it is such an honor to be recognized by the North Caroliniana Society as its 2021 honoree. When I review the list of past recipients, I feel very special and am delighted to be a member of such a distinguished and prestigious group. You know, I feel fortunate to have reached my 87th birthday and can stand and deliver a speech when so many of my peers have either passed away or are enduring restrictive physical conditions. I'm blessed. I can walk 18 holes on the golf course and carry my bag, and occasionally I can join friends and hike 5+ miles on the Mountains to Sea Trail. I believe I have been allowed to live this long to make a difference and not just enjoy life. For that reason, and for other reasons, I have dedicated my life to public service, spending much of my time working to inspire and motivate people, especially young people. My life has been laser focused on breaking barriers that divide us, building bridges that I hope will unite us, and ultimately making history that might inspire future generations. Growing up in the South and living on a sharecropper farm in a small community of Lithonia, Georgia, my life was a struggle and extreme prejudice, segregation. The black people in the town, even the teachers and preachers, had to be subservient to whites at all times. I grew up cautious of white people, but did not avoid being around them as much as I possibly could to better understand them and have them understand me. I knew it was not normal or acceptable for black boys and white boys to be openly friendly. Yet, one of my first best friends was a white boy named Lukey. From age 12 to age 15, we spent countless hours exchanging comic books and reading comic books and dreaming about our future and just simply hanging out together. But as always, the chickens eventually come home to roost. Our friendship ended when, at age 15, his father forbade us to associate and forbade him to be a friend with me and to interact with me in any way. After that, we were never connected again. That early experience in my life was a major disappointment that made me feel both resentful and revengeful. I was fortunate to have two loving and caring parents and grandparents who set wonderful examples for how to survive the dangers of the South. Since it was not uncommon for black people to be routinely killed or beaten, I was often tempted to lash out and challenge the system, but understood clearly what the limitations had to be and to take caution. I realized that at the time, I needed to defy the system to release my frustration. So when I went to use a bathroom on one occasion, instead of using the colored bathroom, which was always cluttered with junk and oil and all kinds of dirt, on that day I decided to check out the white men's bathroom. I went in, used the bathroom, came out, and was accosted by a group of local Klansmen. I was pushed, I was hit, but I finally got away, able to break free, and even though painful, this confrontation did not shatter my commitment to working for justice and fair play. Instead, it became a defining moment that deepened my resolve to remain in the South and to work to break down barriers of segregation and fight Jim Crowism. However, more importantly, I realized to work on controlling my emotions and never allowing anger to drive my actions again was extremely important. The most important commitment I made at that time was to work hard at building bridges, relating to people, and finding ways to create a peaceful environment in which everybody could exist. I graduated from a segregated high school in 1953 where we had only used textbooks, used chairs, used dilapidated furniture. All of this was handed down from the white school. The one advantage we had, though, and the most important one, is we had great, dedicated teachers. But in the 10th grade, I became very disappointed in school and started considering the possibilities of dropping out. I shared this thought with one of my teachers, who was not amused at the prospect, and she responded by saying, "I can't promise you that you will ever have an opportunity when you grow up. I can't promise you that you will ever get a good job. I cannot guarantee that you will even be respected or enjoy freedom. But I can guarantee this: if you're educated and if opportunities come, you will be better prepared and ready to take advantage. My life has been filled with many opportunities, and I have been fortunate to be ready to seize and make the most of each one." The words of that wise teacher changed my life and saved me from making the terrible mistake of dropping out of school. I was fortunate to have 2 loving parents and 2 loving grandparents who constantly worried that my attitude would get me into real trouble and who constantly reminded me how dangerous life could be in the South for a black boy and for black people in general, but especially treacherous for black boys. My mother was raised by her maternal grandmother. After her parents separated and both left the South, moved to different states, when she was 5 years old. But she was the smartest person and strongest person in our family, forcing all of her children to think about themselves as equals and not as unequals. Despite growing up in an environment where attending school was a low priority, she believed that the true hope for success and change was becoming educated. She had an incessant thirst for learning, and she learned to read at an early age herself. She earned her high school diploma through correspondence courses, then convinced a local church to open a school for black kids in the rural area, and they hired her as the teacher. She was my first teacher as well, and she had taught me to emphasize learning to do my best and to get an education. She enrolled me in the 1st grade when I was 5 years old, but at the end of the school year, she refused to promote me. She said that I had done just enough to be the smartest student in the class, but I had not done my best, and that she was simply not going to allow me to start life in the world, thinking all I had to do was just enough to get by. That was a hurtful feeling for me, but I understood what she was saying, that I had not done my best. So I was forced to repeat the first grade. Her words to me, whether you finish first or last, always do your best. This is the lesson that she drilled into me for most of my life. When I was forced to transfer from my first college because of poor grades, her first question to me was, "Did you do your best?" When I answered yes, she urged me to find another college and try again. I was accepted shortly thereafter at Fort Valley State University in South Georgia, and in 1959 graduated with honors, and my mother graduated 2 months later with honors. However, my beginning was rocky because I felt as a college graduate when I got in the Army was a disrespect act imposed upon me. I protested that assignment by writing to then President Eisenhower, asking him to intervene and change my assignment to one more commensurate with my skills as a college graduate. How naive was that? Amazingly enough, I found great satisfaction, though, just writing that letter and expressing my dissatisfaction to the President of the United States. But I was shocked when one day I got called to the commanding officer's office because a letter and a set of orders had come back from the President's office, through the Pentagon, back down to my commanding officer's office, directing that I be reassigned to a mental health clinic at Fort Hood, Texas, as a social worker. For the first time, I felt that I mattered, and I felt I had been respected and received fair play. I remembered the words of that wise teacher, "I can't promise if an opportunity will ever come, but if it does, you will be prepared to take full advantage." I was content with my position, but I was not satisfied. I was not satisfied with the way soldiers were being treated as we went off the base into the local community. Every time I walked off the base of the military compound, the military people were treated, soldiers were treated as just disrespectful. We were segregated again. As we left the base, black soldiers went in one direction, white soldiers had to go in another because we could not associate together in the local community of Killeen, Texas. That to me was both disrespectful and restrictive of my freedom. When I complained to my superiors about the treatment off base, the response was always then stay on the base and be happy. The point is, I was happy, but I was not satisfied. One Saturday morning, I decided to test the community attitude. I walked into a local drugstore, asked for a cup of coffee, and was refused. I immediately returned to base and convinced a group of 12 soldiers to join me to hold a sit-in at that drugstore. To my surprise, the military police found out about this and marched all of us into the office of the commanding general. I'd never met a general before in my life, so this was a pleasure, I thought. The general chastised me for being disruptive and especially for writing to the President of the United States, resulting in a change of assignment, and that I'd gotten away with that and I should be satisfied. As the leader, the general accused me of being a troublemaker who were making life hard for good old black soldiers on the base who knew how to behave, unlike us young upstarts. The general wanted me to promise that we would not engage in any civil rights activities. I indicated respectfully that I could not keep such a commitment. The general, in response to that, confined all of us to base on that Saturday, and on Monday morning, I was on a plane shipped to South Korea. I was sent directly, when I arrived in Korea, to the dividing line between North and South Korea, where I spent most of my tour in Korea. My reputation as a disruptor, of course, had preceded me, and I was therefore warned that if I wrote another letter to the president, I could be court-martialed. Fortunately, a black captain came to my rescue by requesting I become a clerk in his office. The black captain had a very long talk with me about surviving in the Army. He wanted me to know how lucky I had been since he had never known a soldier to write a letter to the President of the United States and not be punished for it. He pointed out that it's important to pick the right fight at the right time, and never fight alone. I left that meeting with a better sense of how to make friends and ultimately influence the leading officers in the military. I had decided to stop challenging the status quo from that point on, settle down, serve my time, and return home to fight another day. As company clerk, I was charged with making sure there was positive relationships and interaction among the troops. It was tough trying to create harmony between black and white, Latino and Korean soldiers. This challenge tested my resolve and prepared me for returning to civilian life, where I would be tested by divisiveness. One day, after leaving the Army, I accepted a juvenile probation officer's position in Savannah, Georgia. I arrived at the early onset of daily civil rights demonstrations, which were still going on, led by Dr. King and a number of other people. I got married and settled in to raise a family. I began advocating for resources to support students, especially black youth. Several black leaders, especially two professional older black women, became my mentors and arranged for opportunities for me to meet both black and white influential people. Through their intervention, I was able to connect with a very wealthy and powerful white couple, Lillian and Frank Spencer. One day, I had a call from Frank Spencer inviting my wife, whose name was Lillian, and me to an invitation-only event at the Savannah Public Library to hear a speech by his good friend, Dr. Frank Porter Graham, former president of the University of North Carolina. The only problem was the public library did not allow blacks to attend events in the main building. The Spencers, however, insisted that we show up for this event, which we did. Reluctantly, we arrived and were, at Frank Spencer's direction, seated on the front row. But then an older white woman arrived and demanded that we be removed, using all kinds of derogatory language. Frank challenged her to sit down and shut up, be quiet, or leave the building. While most of the attendees were baffled by our presence, they were embarrassed even more by the woman's outburst of disrespectfulness. Even Dr. Graham wondered why we were special enough for Frank Graham to take this aggressive action. After the speech, we met Dr. Graham, and during our conversation, I made him aware of my plans to enroll in the School of Social Work at the University of Georgia. Dr. Graham considered that to be something to consider, but he thought if I was going to attend a university, I should attend a great university and come to the University of North Carolina. He then encouraged me to think about applying, and if I could get accepted, he would help me find financial aid, since I had admitted to him that my wife and I just couldn't afford the tuition. I was accepted and ultimately received the largest fellowship ever awarded to a social work student at the University of North Carolina. At UNC, this was my first experience of ever living in a voluntary, desegregated environment. I was assigned to a 3-person dormitory room with 2 Southern white roommates and had a very pleasant experience. During my first year, I was even elected vice president of the Student Association of Social Workers, becoming the first black to hold such a position at the university in modern times. My second year, however, I was even more surprised when my classmates elected me as president of the Student Social Work Association. 2 years after graduating from the university, the Professional Association, the Eastern North Carolina chapter, elected me their president of the association. All of this served to give me not only great confidence, but reinforce my interest in wanting to bridge gaps between people, and I saw these opportunities as certainly being the one that I could use to make that happen. However, a few years later, there was some resistance by members of the association, but eventually, by reaching out and engaging with these folk, assuring them of my balanced and a solid leadership skills, I was able to gain their support. My leadership role in the military, my leadership role through the School of Social Work, my experience with white roommates, and my leadership of the professional organization convinced me that underneath the exterior of negative behavior, there is decency that can be uncovered within any group and among any people. After completing graduate school, I accepted a position at Duke University with a Ford Foundation-sponsored project to focus on the improvement of performance of black students in the all-black Durham County school system. 2 years later, Duke asked me to join the administration as Director of Employee Relations, hoping to improve morale among its non-academic employees, especially black employees, where relationships were extremely low and the treatment of black employees was always protested by white superiors. This created unrest on the campus, which Duke felt the need to try and control. Many of the white supervisors even resented me being there and holding such oversight over their actions. At the same time, black employees were mistrustful of me because they thought I was there to repress them and to appease them so that they would not continue to raise questions about conditions. But over time, I was able to build trust, gain the confidence of both employees and administrators. This was a tumultuous time in North Carolina, and especially on university campuses. Students were protesting over civil rights and the Vietnam War. Campuses and communities in Durham were under great pressure and under great uneasiness. In Durham, students occupied Duke's administrative headquarters, and in Chapel Hill, there were frequent marches down on Franklin Street in the downtown area, while the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had ended generations of legal sanctioned racial discrimination. The crusade for injustice was far from over. In 1966, I accepted a position at Duke University. My wife and I decided to buy a house and live in liberal Chapel Hill because it was convenient for my wife, who had been one of the key founders of a school system for hospitalized schools, the first in the state, at UNC hospitals. Of course, Chapel Hill's liberal image and reputations made the decision easy. We could live in Chapel Hill, buy a house, and not have any problems. Unfortunately, most realtors were not willing to even show us a house, much less sell us a house, outside of the traditional black community. We did buy a house in a relatively new subdivision, but had to use federal laws to force the sale. the Chapel Hill Governing Board made it clear it would not pass an open housing ordinance. But wait, there is more. For the next year, we experienced death threats, including a cross being burned in our yard by a group of teenagers. Even after that incident, and repeated appeals, and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, the governing board still refused to adopt an open housing ordinance. Despite the risk, in 1969, I decided to run for mayor of Chapel Hill, not necessarily to win, but to highlight the needs and historical neglect by the elected leaders of many sections of town, and to force my opponent to commit publicly to rectifying these problems. These problems, just as the mayor and council had failed to adopt an open housing ordinance, certainly loomed large in terms of what we could count on from our leadership. They had failed to pave streets, extend water, sewer lines, provide adequate recreational facilities, and apply for federal grants to develop public housing units for low-income citizens. They had even not shown great respect in support of students and allowing students to be an engaged part of the community. But on May 6th, my life changed because I had not planned to be elected mayor when I was at 34 years old, elected mayor of Chapel Hill, becoming the first Black American to lead a predominantly white southern municipality since the Reconstruction era. 3 months later, I experienced my first crisis when the black food service workers on the university campus went on strike. The support of a union made us all concerned about possible violence. Therefore, President Bill Friday and I persuaded the governor, who was Scott at the time, to hold off sending the State Highway Patrol or National Guard to the community. The two of us spent almost a month around the clock engaging with the workers and urging the food service contractor to negotiate a fair and equitable settlement on behalf of the workers to no avail. After 30 days, we reached a peaceable settlement, giving the workers an increase in wages. From that day forward, Bill Friday and I became close friends and a mentor, and he was a mentor during my term as mayor of Chapel Hill. The mayor of Chapel Hill initially was expected to simply be a ceremonial individual. A few older residents were concerned that I, at my early stages, were pushing too hard, and that I made too many promises that would change Chapel Hill. So I had a tough time really trying to reach out, engage, and get people to feel more comfortable with me as mayor of Chapel Hill. The black community also had its suspicion that as mayor, I would probably make things a lot worse for them and not necessarily move things toward a more positive area. But then there were also those who thought I was not aggressive enough. Like an older black woman who came to my office a month after I was there and sat down and said, "Mr. Mayor, you've been in office now for 30 days and that street in front of my house is still not paved." That street was paved within 6 months when we were able to get the funds. Unfortunately, there were those who thought that I was trying to take over Chapel Hill, and as a result, found difficulty working with the person who was city manager at the time. The manager just simply refused to carry out certain directives, and I had to persuade the board to fire him a year after I was in office. That put me back a bit in having to assure people that I was not trying to become an imperial mayor. At the end of my term, I had kept all my promises. The most important thing I think I had done was to bridge gaps between the town of Chapel Hill and the University of North Carolina, which were rocky from time to time. I felt that I had bridged the gap between the communities in Chapel Hill. I had worked hard to try and engage with Carrboro, which was a town that Chapel Hill was always accused of disrespecting. And I felt very good about having started a public bus system, increased the units of public housing, and even went as far as to try and change the way in which policing was implemented in Chapel Hill by placing social workers for the first time and becoming the only community to have social workers in the police department to deal with domestic and weekend problems. That unit, I am very proud to say today, has grown to be one of the largest and most effective, what is called the crisis units, in police departments across North Carolina and in Chapel Hill. I did gain the confidence of the police by increasing police and fire salaries. And I'm proud of the fact that we were able to construct the first municipal building in Chapel Hill. When I left office in 1975, I had fulfilled all of those promises that I had made. A national magazine called Ebony wrote an article about me as the mayor who kept his promises. And I felt vindicated that at least I had learned some tough lessons early on growing up in the South, which prepared me to really look beyond just people's skin color and philosophies, and to make every effort to engage around common ground. I think that was proven in the end, because when I was elected mayor, it was about 52% of the vote. The second year, about 69% of the vote, and the last year, 89% of the vote, reflecting that we had made tremendous progress, and even a lot of the people who may still question some of the actions I took, they too found solace in the outcomes of the work that I had been privileged to do. I went on, and after the distinguished career as mayor, and during the time I decided to run for Congress. That was 1972. Because Chapel Hill had been trying for the longest to get a member of the Orange County Board of Commissioners. It ended up that we failed every time until 1972, when I ran for Congress and generated enough votes in Orange County to elect the first woman and the first black person to sit on the board of the county commissioners. In 1976, I ran for lieutenant governor, and most people thought it was a joke. Why would I want to think that I could go out and run for lieutenant governor in North Carolina and get elected? I didn't think I could get elected, but I wanted to try it anyway. And so I did. Out of 8 candidates running, I was expected to come in last. Instead, I came in first. I did lose in a second primary runoff because, again, racism raised its ugly head in the campaign when my opponent, former Speaker of the House, decided to use it in his campaign. But it probably was the best outcome. Again, keep in mind, I've had some disappointments early in my life. I could recover from those. I was disappointed when I walked out of that white men's bathroom and got accosted by a Klansman. I was disappointed when I went in the military service. I was even disappointed when I couldn't make the grades at my first college and had to transfer. So I decided that this would probably not be the end of my life, but another lesson to be learned and greater strength to be gained. Fortunately, Governor Jim Hunt was elected, and he made history when he decided to appoint me Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I became the first black person to ever hold a cabinet-level position in a Southern governor's cabinet since Reconstruction. It was terrible times, some tough times. I had difficulty getting the confidence of the General Assembly. I had difficulty trying to make peace within the department and gain the confidence of division leaders. And I had difficulty really getting people to buy into some of the proposals that I was making for us to try and carry North Carolina's natural resource programs to a different level. One group that people thought could really be my downfall was the commercial fishermen of North Carolina. These were very rough individuals, and I felt if they were going to be my worst problem, my greatest headache, that I had to test my resolve to build a bridge with this group. I felt the resolve to break down the barriers between this group, because the barriers were not just based on ethnicity or race. They were based on the fact that these people distrusted the government in general. So I asked my staff to create a meeting on the coast and allow me to go in and meet with these commercial fishermen. The governor didn't think that was a good idea. Many of my friends thought it was not a very smart thing to do. My staff was concerned that I would only be shouted down and run out of the building and embarrassed, and that headlines would be that I had failed again in some attempt to relate across lines. I insisted that we do it. If I was going down, then I was going down believing in what I felt so strongly about. I could not stand and allow barriers to remain that I knew could be very difficult to deal with in times going forward. So we planned the meeting. And my good friend Walter R. Davis, who was in Texas, flew over because he too was concerned that I was walking into an embarrassing environment. I walked in the room that night wearing a three-piece suit, cufflinks, and a vest. I realized I was overdressed. I took off my coat, took off the vest, took off my cufflinks, rolled up my sleeves, and spoke for 15 minutes, sharing with these people how we together could make a difference in their lives and in developing our fishing industry to a point of respectability. I laid out my plans, and I promised them that with their support, we could increase the market share for their fishing, and I would always be available as secretary to listen to their concerns and be able to work together to resolve most of their problems. When I finished, I got a standing ovation. I also had a relationship that budded at that time, and for the rest of my term, one of the most cooperative and supportive groups was the marine fishery, the commercial fishermen on the coast of North Carolina. I think that sometimes we allow ourselves to be sucked into believing things about people that cloud our judgment and allow us to create reasons in our own mind as to why we can't relate to certain people. Growing up in the South, I let that become a part of my mantra for a while. But as I got older and as I had more experiences, I decided that I had to be one person who would work across lines with those with whom I even disagreed. As the highest ranking black official in North Carolina, one other problem I want to highlight that rose up for both, that caused difficulty for both Governor Hunt and me. That was a group of young people called the Wilmington 10 that had been incarcerated with extraordinary long sentences after engaging in some destructive activities, including the burning of some buildings in Wilmington, North Carolina. This group was led by a Reverend Ben Chavis, and the property destruction had really been serious, but certainly not justifiable for the long sentences of incarceration heaped upon these young people. Black leaders across the state were demanding that Governor Hunt do something about it. And Governor Hunt's staff and I met time and time again. We couldn't agree on what action he should take. He was confused about how far he could go without losing his support. And I was pushing, along with a couple of others, that he should take some action or we would not have any long-lasting peace because demonstrations would continue. We finally ended up deciding the most rational action for Governor Hunt to take was to release the 9 young people from jail and let them be free with time served, but keep Ben Chavis there for a while longer. That was the decision, that was the action. Immediately the pressure came on me from the black community, accusing me of having sold out, and I certainly tried to explain the rationale for what we'd done, but I did not waver from my position. I supported the governor. Some called on me to resign, and I simply said I would not do that. I felt that the whole plans that Governor Hunt had for this state and I could be a part of was far bigger than just one incident and one event. I think it requires toughness and ability to push beyond disappointment and uneasiness when people disagree. I survived that, and at the end, people came around. Even Ben Chavis and I became good friends. I feel blessed to have served 13 years in the North Carolina Senate, where I switched my commitment to work on education and have spent most of my time engaged in pushing for better school systems, better educational opportunities, and equal educational opportunities for all kids. I was shocked when I lost my Senate race after 13 years in 2004. But again, just as having lost the lieutenant governor's race and then being appointed by Governor Hunt became a blessing in disguise. Just the same repetitiveness. I lost the 2004 Senate race, but I gained a better position when Governor Mike Easley appointed me chairman of the North Carolina State Board of Education. That gave me the platform from which I could then follow my passion to help build better public schools, better education opportunities, and go back. Remember I talked to you early on about my mother saying that the whole tool for freedom would be education? Remember when the teacher, wise old teacher, said to me, if you have an education, you can survive and opportunities, take advantage of opportunities? Here I was in a position now to carry that same message to hundreds of boys and girls throughout North Carolina as we work to improve their educational experience and improve their schools. The life journey I have enjoyed to this point is not the life journey I had envisioned. I could not see that I could rise to the level that I have risen and have the privilege to interact with people regardless of ethnicity, regardless of race, regardless of economic status, regardless of philosophy, and regardless of educational levels. I could not envision that I could share the platform with such impressive people or be judged to be a part of organizations and groups with such impressive people as here with the North Caroliniana Society. I feel truly blessed, friends, and I hope that I have left a few nuggets in my path that will inspire and encourage others to take a look at themselves and not be blinded by skin color or ethnicity, and learn to look beyond labels: conservative, right-wing, liberal, progressive, political affiliations. In most cases, not all, but in most cases are labels. They should not be barriers. But I also hope people will understand that when barriers are so high, so strong, so resistant to being moved, the goal is to allow them to stand but go around these barriers and still reach the goal and do what you know is right. Once during an interview, a reporter asked me, "Howard Lee, how far do you think you might have gone otherwise if you were not black?" I thought for a while and I said, probably not as far as I have gone being black. I was elected mayor of Chapel Hill and made international, national, and statewide news. But more importantly, I was elected and gave a lot of people of all ethnic groups a reason to believe that if you keep pushing forward and do the right things and prepare yourself adequately, nothing can stop you from reaching higher heights. And so I truly believe that, as I have made history and certainly today enjoyed a wonderful life. So finally, looking at today's circumstance and environment, I can hear somebody saying, "How do we deal with things today, Mr. Barrier Breaker?" And my thoughts are that we start with ourselves. Look at yourself and ask if you are part of the problem or can you be a part of the solution. I ask you not to make assumptions about people because they wear a certain label, but try and determine if there is some decency somewhere inside of that individual, and you can find it and you can unearth it. You may not, but it sure would feel good just to know you tried. And I have never told anyone that he or she is wrong, because I don't know if they really are, and I have no right to judge them on that basis. But I do always leave them with something to think about. Maybe what you feel and believe and is carrying it's comfortable for you, but have you thought about another way to do it? And I offer them my own nuggets of what I think might be. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it has not. But the gratification for me is that I tried. For me, I will continue to extend a hand of friendship, a hand of engagement, and become offering hope for people who may feel a sense of hopelessness. During the little time I have left on this earth, I hope to keep trying to break more barriers, to build stronger bridges, maybe make a little more history, but try to turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. And for you, isn't it strange that princes and kings and clowns who caper in sawed-off rings, and common folk like you and me are builders for eternity? Each is given a bag of tools, a shapeless mass, a book of rules, and each may build as life is long, stumbling blocks or stepping stones. I, my friends, have chosen stepping stones.